The gun barrel pressed against Jesse Holt's temple
Do you,
wasn't shaking
Clara Marie
Horace
Wynn?
Wynn's hand, never shook when he meant to destroy something. But Clara's voice cut through the valley like thunder. "Pull that trigger, father, and you'll have to shoot me too." 3 months ago, she'd been a merchant's daughter in silk gloves. Now her hands were
Loosen your
calloused,
grip.
her dress was mud-stained,
weight
and
do
she
the
stood
work.
between a servant and a bullet without flinching. This wasn't the marriage
Clara,
anyone planned.
Make sure you keep
It was the one
seats
that
even
saved
on
them
this
both.
row. We need to push
Before
harder
we
if
begin,
want to finish
I
in
want to
time.
invite you to subscribe to this channel and stay with me until the very end of this story. Please comment below with the city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel.
You will come home
Now,
with me right
let's go
now,
back to
girl.
where it all
I said
started.
no.
The morning Horace Wynn decided to sell his daughter the sky over Wind Valley burned red as a fresh wound.
Girl.
Clara stood in the parlor wearing her mother's faded blue dress. Through the window, Jesse Holt was mucking out the stables, his shoulders bent under the weight of work that never ended. "I won't do it." Her father didn't look up from the ledger. Red ink bled across the pages, debts that had grown teeth. "You will. Unless you want to watch this land sold at auction." Clara's hands twisted in her skirt. "We could sell the horses or... already promised." Horace finally looked at her, and his eyes held nothing but arithmetic. "You're the only thing I've got left worth anything. I'm your daughter. You're a mouth to feed with no husband and no prospects. 23 years old. That makes you a liability." He closed the ledger with a snap. "So you're going to marry Jesse Holt. He's agreed to pay off my debts." The floor tilted. "Jesse, the stable hand. He's been saving for 8 years. Watched you from afar, apparently." Horace stood straightening his vest. "Consider yourself lucky. Most men wouldn't want—" "Don't." Clara's voice cracked. "Don't you dare finish that sentence. The wedding is tomorrow. Wear something appropriate." He moved toward the door. "And Clara, don't embarrass me by crying. Holt paid good money for you." The door closed with the sound of a coffin lid dropping. That night Clara couldn't sleep. She sat by her window and stared at the darkness where Jesse Holt slept in the servants' quarters, a lean-to shed that had housed him for nearly a decade. What kind of man saved money for 8 years just to buy a woman who'd never looked at him twice? Running crossed her mind. Steal a horse ride for the rail station, disappear into some city where names like Wynn meant nothing. But her mother was buried here, and running would mean that grave really would be bulldozed. So Clara sat by the window until dawn, and she didn't cry, because crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. The wedding took place in a hollow church that hadn't seen regular services in 5 years. Father Morrison, half drunk, mumbled through the ceremony, while Horace Wynn stood witness with the same expression he wore when breaking horses. Clara wore her mother's dress and felt like a ghost. Jesse Holt stood beside her in a clean shirt that still smelled of lye soap. He was taller than she'd realized. His face was weathered from sun and work, his hands calloused but gentle when he took hers for the vows. "Do you, Clara Marie Wynn, take this man?" She heard herself respond. "I do." Like burying her freedom 6 feet deep. "Do you, Jesse Matthew Holt, take this woman?" "I do." His voice was low, certain. Not the voice of a man claiming property. "Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife." No kiss. No celebration. Horace handed Jesse a receipt like transferring livestock, and that was that. Outside, Jesse helped her into a borrowed wagon. Horace didn't stay to watch them leave. He'd gotten what he needed. Clara was someone else's problem now. They rode in silence toward Jesse's cabin on the far edge of the valley, where the land was harder, less forgiving. Where the ranch kept its servants and tools far enough from the main house that Horace Wynn never had to see how the other half lived. The cabin was small. Rough-hewn logs weathered to gray bone. One room with a fireplace, a bed, a table, 2 chairs. A window facing east. That was her life now. Clara climbed down before Jesse could help her. She stood in front of the cabin and felt something crack inside her chest. "It's not much," Jesse said quietly. but it's honest. She didn't turn around. How long have you been planning this buying me? Your father lied about that part. Jesse pulled his hat off. I've been saving money because a man should have something put by. The watching you from afar, that's the story he told, to make it seem less like what it was. Clara turned. What was it then? Desperation on both sides. He held his hat in both hands. Your father came to me a month ago, said he needed money fast, said he had a daughter who'd be ruined if he went under. He offered you like merchandise, and Jesse looked away. I'm not proud I said yes, but I thought maybe it was better than whatever alternative he had in mind. At least with me, you'd be safe. Safe? Clara laughed sharp as breaking glass. I'm a bought woman married to a servant. That's not safety. That's just a different prison. Maybe. But in this prison, you don't owe me anything, ma'am. I won't force you to anything you don't want. You can have the bed. I'll sleep outside. Clara stared at him. She hadn't expected this. Mercy. Small and quiet and offered without expectation. You'll freeze. I've frozen before. Jesse moved to unload their belongings. There's bread and butter inside. Coffee too. I'll be by the barn if you need anything. He walked away before she could respond. Clara stood alone as the sun descended. Around her the valley spread out in harsh beauty land that had bankrupted her father. Land that would probably kill her too, just slower. She went inside. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and solitude. The bed was small, covered with a quilt mended so many times it was more thread than fabric. The table held a tin plate, a single cup, a knife. This was a life stripped to survival. Clara sat on the bed and felt the weight crush down. She'd woken up as her father's daughter. She'd go to sleep as a servant's wife. For the first time since her mother died, Clara let herself cry. Not dramatic weeping, but silent, exhausted tears. She cried until her eyes burned. Then she stopped, because tears didn't solve anything. She lay down without undressing, and closed her eyes. Outside, Jesse Holt rolled himself in a blanket under cold stars, and tried to sleep despite the guilt. He'd saved her from one fate, but condemned her to another. The woman he'd married hated him. She had every right to, but at least here she'd be safe from worse men. That had to count for something. It didn't, but it was all he had. Clara woke before dawn to an axe biting wood. She sat up, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling, the rough blanket, the cold that bit at her skin. Through the window, Jesse was splitting firewood in the pre-dawn darkness, his breath misting. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and opened the door. Jesse immediately stopped. Didn't mean to wake you. You didn't. The cold hit like a fist. Do you always start this early? Ranchers rise with the sun. Servants rise before it. No bitterness, just fact. There's oatmeal on the stove. I'll be up at the main barn today. Your father still expects me to work. That was part of our arrangement. Something cold settled in Clara's stomach. You're still working for him. After you paid off his debts. I'm still working his land. Different thing. Jesse picked up the split wood. But it won't be forever. I've got a plan. What plan? He looked at her. Really looked. Clara saw something she hadn't expected, determination, that ran deeper than resignation. To build something that's ours. This cabin sits on unclaimed land. If we work it right, file the proper papers, we could homestead. Make it legitimate. Homestead. The word felt foreign. You want to farm this? I want to own something no man can take from me. From us. He shifted the wood. I know you didn't choose this, but as long as we're stuck together, we might as well build something better than what we were handed. He said it with such certainty that Clara didn't know how to respond. I don't know how to farm. Then I'll teach you. Jesse headed toward the cabin. You don't have to decide today, but you should know I don't plan on staying at the bottom forever, and neither should you. He went inside, leaving Clara with questions crowding her mind. For the first time since this nightmare began, something that wasn't quite hope stirred in her chest. Jesse Holt might be everything she'd been raised to consider beneath her, but he was also the first person in a long time who'd spoken to her like she was more than a problem to solve. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter and went inside to the warmth Jesse had built before she'd even woken. Maybe survival would be harder and rougher than anything she'd imagined, but maybe it would also be more honest. The days developed a rhythm. Wake before dawn. Eat simple breakfast. Watch Jesse leave for the main ranch. Then the cabin belonged to Clara, along with all the work. At first, she didn't know where to start. The merchant's daughter didn't know how to grind corn by hand, or haul water or split kindling without cutting herself. She'd had servants. Jesse had been one of them. The irony wasn't lost on her. The first time she tried grinding cornmeal, the handle slipped and cracked her knuckles. Damn it! That evening, Jesse found her sitting on the floor nursing her bruised hand and staring at the ungound corn like it was her enemy. "You're gripping too tight," he said. "I'm not asking for help." "Didn't say you were." He knelt beside her, took the grinder. "See, loose grip. Let the weight do the work, not your strength." He demonstrated, then handed it back. Clara tried again. This time the handle moved smooth. "Tomorrow, it'll be easier," Jesse said, standing. "Everything's hard the first time. You always this patient. Only with things worth the trouble." He said it casual, but something in his tone made Clara look up. Jesse was already moving toward the door. "I need to check the fence line before dark," he said. "There's beans and cornbread if you're hungry." He left before she could respond. Clara sat there holding the grinder, his words echoing only with things worth the trouble. She wasn't sure if he meant the cornmeal or her. A week passed. Then 2. Clara learned fast because quitting meant admitting defeat, and defeat wasn't in her vocabulary. Her father had given her many terrible things, but he'd also given her stubbornness that ran bone deep. The water buckets left splinters in her palms. She pulled them out with her teeth and kept hauling. The fire died 3 times. She cursed it back to life, each time learning which wood burned hot and which just smoked. The bread came out hard as stone. She fed it to the chickens and tried again. Jesse never criticized her failures. When he came home each evening dirty and exhausted from breaking horses for Horace Wynne, he'd survey whatever small disaster Clara had created and simply nod. "You're getting better," he'd say. Or, "That's closer than yesterday." One evening, Clara successfully sewed a tear in his work shirt. The stitches were crooked, but they held. "You're good with your hands," Jesse said. "Just needed practice." Clara looked down at her fingers. Blistered now, nails broken, nothing like before. "I'm good at survival. That's different than being good. Survival's harder than most things people call good." Jesse pulled the mended shirt on. "Don't sell yourself short." She didn't know how to respond. Kindness from this man felt dangerous, not because he was cruel, but because accepting it meant acknowledging he wasn't the enemy she needed him to be. "Why are you like this?" The question came out sharper than intended. Jesse paused at the door. "Like what?" "Patient. Kind. You act like I'm not the worst thing that ever happened to you." He turned and his face was serious. "You're not the worst thing, Clara. Not even close. The worst thing was living my whole life being told I was worth less than dirt. I won't do that to another person, not even accidentally." He left before she could find words. Clara sat in the firelight and felt something inside her shift, a wall she'd built starting to crack. 3 weeks into the marriage, a storm rolled over Wind Valley with fury. Rain hammered the roof, found every crack in the walls, turned the yard into a river of mud. Jesse had gone to check on the animals. Hours passed. The storm didn't break. Clara paced by the door, worry turning sharp. When the door finally opened, Jesse stumbled in. soaked through, bleeding from a gash across his forehead. Breathing hard, moving wrong. "The horses!" he gasped. "Barn flooded. Had to—" He collapsed against her. Clara caught him, her fear crystallizing into action she didn't know she had. She'd never nursed anyone, but Jesse was shaking with cold and shock, and there was no one else. She stripped off his wet shirt with trembling hands, built up the fire until the cabin felt like summer, found clean rags and pressed them against the cut on his forehead. "You risked your life for horses that aren't even yours," she said, anger masking her fear. "They're living things." His teeth chattered. "Couldn't let them drown." "You could have drowned." "But I didn't." Clara wanted to hit him. Instead, she pressed harder until the bleeding slowed. His skin was ice under her fingers. "Pneumonia killed people out here. Death came easy in Wind Valley." She worked through the night, keeping the fire blazing, wrapping Jesse in every blanket, spooning warm broth between his lips when his shivering calmed. She'd made the broth from memory the way their old cook had done, and was shocked when it actually tasted healing. Toward dawn, Jesse's breathing eased. The fever that had started to build broke before it could take hold. When he opened his eyes, Clara was sitting beside him, exhausted, filthy, angry. "You're an idiot." "Yeah." His voice was rough. "But the horses lived. And if you'd died, then what, your grand plan dies with you, and I'm left here alone with nothing." The words exposed fears she hadn't acknowledged even to herself. Jesse looked at her for a long moment. "You'd have the land. I made sure of that, filed papers with your name on them too. Everything I've built goes to you." Clara's anger faltered. "When week after we married seemed right." "Stop." Clara stood abruptly, needing distance from the gratitude building against her will. "Stop being so noble about everything." She went outside into the storm's aftermath. The valley was washed clean, the air sharp. Mud covered everything, but the world hadn't ended. They were still here. Inside, Jesse Holt was alive because she'd kept him that way. Clara stood in the cold morning and felt something shift. Not love. Not yet. Maybe never. But something like respect. When she went back inside, Jesse was asleep again. She sat beside him and watched the rise and fall of his breathing. This man who'd bought her with his savings and nearly died saving animals that belonged to her bastard father. "You're still an idiot," she whispered. But her hand rested on his shoulder, keeping watch. And for the first time since the wedding, Clara didn't feel entirely alone. The wound left a scar, a thin white line that caught the light when Jesse turned his head. Clara found herself looking at it more than she should, reminded of the night she'd learned courage and stupidity often wore the same face. Jesse recovered fast. Within days he was back to his routine. But something had changed between them. Not warmth exactly, but a thawing. Conversations that had been cautious before began to hold actual weight. They talked about the land, which sections might support crops where water could be found, how to expand the cabin when they had resources. They didn't talk about the past, but the future became safe territory. One evening, Clara worked up courage for the question that had been gnawing at her. "Why did you really say yes when my father offered me like livestock? Why?" Jesse was mending a bridle. He didn't look up. "Because I've spent my whole life being told I'm worth nothing. Thought maybe I could keep someone else from learning that lesson the hard way." "You think my father would have—" "I don't think. I know." Jesse's voice was flat. "Horace Wynn isn't a good man. When he came to me with his proposition, I asked what would happen to you if I said no. He told me he'd find another buyer, someone with different intentions." His hands stilled. "So I said yes, because at least with me, you'd have a choice." Clara's throat tightened. She'd spent weeks angry at Jesse for being part of her imprisonment. But she'd never considered what might have happened if he'd refused. "Thank you." The words came quiet. "I never said that. Thank you for not being worse." Jesse finally looked at her, something like sadness in his eyes. That's a hell of a thing to be thanked for, being not worse. It's what I have to work with. Yeah, guess it is. They sat in silence after that. But it wasn't suffocating. It was the silence of two people who'd begun to understand they were on the same side. Days turned into weeks. Clara learned the rhythm of their life. How to plant seeds in soil that fought back. How to recognize clouds that meant rain versus clouds that meant trouble. How to exist in a space smaller than her childhood bedroom without suffocating. Most importantly, she learned that the life her father had sold her into wasn't the end of her story. It was just a different chapter. Harder, rougher, stripped of pretense. But it was hers, and Jesse's. One afternoon, Clara was hauling water when the bucket handle broke. Water spilled everywhere, soaking her dress and boots. God damn it! Jesse appeared from around the cabin. You all right? The handle snapped. I'm soaked, and I just hauled that water all the way from the creek. Clara kicked the broken bucket. This place hates me. The place doesn't hate you. Jesse picked up the bucket, examined the handle. It just doesn't make anything easy. There's a difference. Easy would be nice for once. Easy doesn't teach you anything. He looked at her, and something in his expression made Clara's breath catch. You've learned more in a month here than most people learn in a year. That matters. Does it? I'm still just a servant's wife in a falling-apart cabin on land nobody wants. You're a woman who can grind corn, haul water, keep a fire alive, and nurse a dying man back to health. Jesse's voice was steady. You're a woman who doesn't quit when things get hard. That's not just anything. Clara stared at him. In the afternoon light, with his sleeves rolled up and that scar white against his forehead, Jesse Holt looked like exactly what he was, a man who'd survived everything life threw at him and was still standing. And he was looking at her like she was doing the same thing. I'll fix the handle, he said, breaking the moment. Get you a stronger one this time. Jesse. He turned back. Thank you. For seeing me as more than what my father said I was. Something shifted in his face. Clara, your father's a fool. Always has been. The rest of us just had to live around it. He walked away toward the barn, leaving Clara standing in the puddle of spilled water, with her heart doing something complicated in her chest. That night, Jesse slept outside under the stars like always. But Clara had stopped trying to convince him otherwise. She understood now he wasn't avoiding her. He was giving her the space and safety he'd promised on their wedding day. That kind of integrity was rarer than gold in Wind Valley. When Clara finally went to sleep, she didn't dream of her father's house or the life she'd lost. She dreamed of spring planting and cabin additions and futures that might actually be possible. She woke to the sound of Jesse's axe splitting wood in the pre-dawn darkness. She lay there for a moment, listening to the rhythm of his work, steady, reliable, honest. Then she got up to start the fire and make breakfast for the man who'd bought her freedom and was teaching her what it meant to build something worth keeping. The merchant's daughter was gone. In her place was someone harder, tougher, more real. Clara Holt was being born in the hard-scrabbled dirt of Wind Valley. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly who she was meant to become. Spring came to Wind Valley like a promise that might be kept or broken, depending on how hard you were willing to work for it. Clara stood in the field behind the cabin with a sack of seed corn slung over her shoulder and dirt already under her fingernails. Jesse was 20 feet ahead, cutting furrows with a plow he'd borrowed from a neighbor who owed him a favor. The mule pulling it was stubborn and mean, but Jesse talked to it like it was reasonable, and somehow that worked. You ready? He called back. Clara hefted the seed bag. As ready as I'll ever be. Drop 3 seeds every foot. Cover them light. Don't pack the soil too hard or they'll suffocate. 3 seeds, 1 foot, don't murder them with dirt. Got it. Jesse grinned, the first real smile she'd seen from him that wasn't shadowed by exhaustion or worry. You're learning the language. The language of dirt and failure. Very useful. The language of not starving come fall. Even more useful. Clara started dropping seeds. The work was monotonous and backbreaking, bent over for hours while the sun climbed higher and turned the valley into an oven. Her back screamed, her hands cramped. Sweat ran down her spine and soaked through her dress. But she didn't stop. By noon, they'd planted half the field. Jesse called a break, and they sat in the shade of the cabin, passing a canteen of water back and forth. "You did good," Jesse said. "I dropped seeds in dirt, not exactly building a cathedral." "Cathedrals don't feed you through winter. This will." He took a drink, then handed the canteen back. "You're tougher than you give yourself credit for." Clara looked out at the field, at the rows they'd made together, at the future they were literally planting in ground that had never given anyone anything without a fight. "I don't feel tough. I feel like I'm one bad day away from breaking." That's what tough is. Knowing you might break and doing it anyway. Jesse stood, stretched his back. "Come on, we've got another half field before sundown." They worked until the light failed, and Clara's hands were blistered raw. When they finally quit, every muscle in her body hurt in ways she hadn't known were possible. Inside the cabin, Jesse heated water for washing and brought out the last of their salt pork. Clara ate mechanically, too tired for conversation. "You should sleep inside tonight," she said suddenly. Jesse looked up from his plate. "What? It's your cabin. You built it. You shouldn't have to sleep outside like—" She struggled for words. "Like you don't belong in your own home." "Clara, I know what you're doing. Being honorable, giving me space, all of that. But it's spring now. The ground is still cold, and we're—" She faltered. "We're not strangers anymore, are we?" Jesse set his fork down carefully. "No, we're not strangers." "Then sleep inside. Take the bed. I can—" "We'll share it." Jesse's voice was quiet but firm. "Like married people do. Nothing more than that unless you want it. But I'm not making you sleep on the floor, and I'm done sleeping in the dirt when there's a perfectly good bed going to waste." Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. Sharing a bed was intimate in ways that terrified her. But Jesse was right. They were married. They'd been living together for over a month. And if she was being honest with herself, part of her was tired of sleeping alone in the darkness, listening to the cabin settle, and wondering if every sound was something dangerous. "All right," she said. "We share the bed." That night they lay on opposite sides of the mattress with a canyon of space between them. Clara stared at the ceiling and tried not to think about the warmth radiating from Jesse's body, about how strange it was to share sleeping space with someone after all these weeks of solitude. "Clara." Jesse's voice came through the darkness. "Yeah. Thank you for letting me come inside." She smiled despite herself. "It's your cabin, Jesse. I didn't let you do anything." "Still, thank you." They didn't talk after that, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who'd started to figure out how to exist together without weapons drawn. Clara fell asleep, listening to Jesse breathe, and for the first time since her mother died, she felt something close to safe. The weeks blurred together in a rhythm of work that demanded everything and gave back only the possibility of survival. The corn sprouted tiny green shoots that Clara checked every morning like a mother counting her children. Jesse worked the main ranch during the day and came home to work their own land until dark. They ate simple meals and fell into bed exhausted, but the cabin was changing. Jesse built shelves for storage. Clara sewed curtains from flour sacks. Small touches that transformed the space from a place you survived in to a place you actually lived. One evening, Clara was scrubbing their two plates when Jesse came in carrying something wrapped in burlap. "What's that?" "Got paid today. Extra for breaking that black stallion your father couldn't handle." Jesse set the bundle on the table and unwrapped it. "Thought you could use these." Inside were 3 books, used, worn but intact. Pride and Prejudice. A volume of Wordsworth poems. David Copperfield. Clara's hands went to her mouth. "Jesse, I know you miss reading. Saw you looking at the almanac like it was Shakespeare." He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly awkward. It's not much, but... Clara picked up. Pride and Prejudice ran her fingers over the cover. She'd left all her books behind when she married. Had assumed that part of her life was over, the part that had time for stories and poetry and worlds beyond Wind Valley's harsh borders. This is... Her voice cracked. You spent your wages on books. Spent my wages on something that'll make you happy. That's not waste, Clara. That's investment. She looked up at him. This man who'd been a stranger 2 months ago and was now someone who knew her well enough to understand what she'd lost. Someone who cared enough to try to give some of it back. Thank you, she whispered. You're welcome. That night, while Jessie mended harnesses by lamplight, Clara read aloud from Pride and Prejudice. She hadn't planned to. It just felt right to share the gift he'd given her. Her voice was rusty at first, stumbling over words she hadn't spoken in months. But Jessie listened like she was performing Shakespeare at a grand theater instead of reading Austen in a one-room cabin on the edge of nowhere. When she finally stopped, her throat tired, Jessie looked up from his work. You've got a nice voice for reading. Sounds like... I don't know. Like the words matter more when you say them. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. That's the writing, not me. It's both. Something passed between them in that moment, something that felt dangerous and inevitable all at once. Clara set the book down and stood quickly. I should bank the fire. It's late. Clara. She turned back. Jessie was standing now, the mended harness forgotten in his hands. I'm glad you're here, he said. I know that's a strange thing to say given how it all happened, but I am glad. Clara's throat tightened. What was she? Sorry, grateful, confused. All of those things and more. I'm glad you're not what I thought you'd be. What did you think I'd be? Someone who'd make me regret being alive. Jessie flinched like she'd struck him. Clara. But you didn't. You haven't. You've been... She struggled for the right word. Kind. You've been kind in ways I didn't know men could be. They stood there in the lamplight, the space between them feeling charged with things neither of them knew how to name. Finally, Jessie nodded. We should sleep. Tomorrow's another early day. They went to bed on opposite sides of the mattress like always. But that night, Clara dreamed of hands holding books and voices reading poetry, and when she woke in the darkness, she realized she'd rolled toward the center in her sleep. Jessie's hand was inches from hers on the blanket between them. Clara stared at that space so small, so vast, and wondered what it would mean to close it. Then she turned back to her side of the bed and tried to sleep because some distances were safer, left uncrossed. Late spring brought the first real test of everything they'd built. Clara was in the garden behind the cabin they'd started, one with seeds Jessie had traded work for, when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses moving fast. She stood shading her eyes against the sun. 3 riders crested the ridge, and even from a distance Clara recognized the lead horse. Her father. Ice flooded her veins. She dropped the hoe and ran for the cabin. Jessie was inside sharpening tools, and he looked up when she burst through the door. My father's coming, with 2 others. Jessie's face went hard. He set down the blade he'd been working on and moved to the door. Stay inside. Jessie? Stay inside, Clara, please. She wanted to argue, but something in his voice stopped her. Jessie stepped outside, and Clara pressed herself against the wall beside the window where she could see without being easily seen. Horace Wynne rode up to the cabin like he owned it, because in his mind, he probably still did. The men with him were ranch hands Clara recognized. Big men, mean men, the kind Horace kept around for situations that required muscle over brains. Holt! Horace called out, not bothering to dismount. Where's my daughter? Your daughter's none of your concern anymore. Jessie's voice was level, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders. You sold that right when you took my money. I sold you a wife, not permanent ownership. Clara belongs with her family. Her family sold her like livestock. I'd say that cancels any claims you have left. Horace's face reddened. You're getting above yourself, boy. Don't forget what you are. A man who keeps his word, more than you can say. One of the ranch hands shifted in his saddle hand, moving toward the rifle strapped there. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. I'm giving you a chance, Holt. Send Clara out and we'll forget this arrangement ever happened. I'll even give you half your money back. No. No. Horace leaned forward. You realize I can make your life very difficult. You still work my land. I can make sure you never work anywhere in this valley again. Then do it. But Clara stays here. She's my daughter. She's my wife. Jesse took a step forward. And if you think I'm going to hand her back so you can sell her again to the next man who makes a better offer, you're even more of a fool than I thought. The ranch hand went for his rifle. Clara was out the door before conscious thought caught up with action. Stop! All eyes turned to her. Horace's face cycled through surprise, anger, and something that might have been calculation. Clara, get on a horse. We're leaving. No. Her father's eyes narrowed. What did you say to me? I said no. Clara moved to stand beside Jesse. You sold me, father. You looked at your own daughter and saw a debt payment. So I'm done being yours. You don't know what you're saying. This man, he's nothing. A servant. You think he can give you the life you deserve? He gives me respect. That's more than you ever did. Horace's face went dark with rage. You ungrateful, I gave you everything. Clothes, food, education. You gave me a roof over my head and made me feel worthless for needing it. Clara's voice shook but held. Every day you reminded me I was a burden. That I was the reason we were losing everything. You sold me to save your pride, not your land. We both know it. I saved you from becoming a spinster with no prospects. You sold me to save yourself. Don't rewrite history just because it makes you look bad. Horace stared at her like he was seeing a stranger. Maybe he was. The daughter he'd raised to be quiet and obedient was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned that survival meant fighting, and sometimes fighting meant standing your ground against the people who were supposed to love you. If you leave with him, Horace said slowly, you're no daughter of mine. You understand that you'll be dead to me. The words should have hurt. Maybe they would have 2 months ago. But Clara had buried so much of her old life already that this final severance felt almost like relief. Then I'm dead, she said. And you can add me to all the other things you've lost, because you couldn't see past your own pride. For a moment, Horace looked like he might actually climb down from his horse and try to drag her away by force. His hands clenched on the reins, knuckles white, but Jesse shifted slightly, moving just enough to put himself between Clara and her father, and something in that small movement must have communicated itself clearly. Touch her and die. Horace saw it. So did the ranch hands. You'll regret this, Horace said finally. Both of you. This valley's not big enough for you to hide from the consequences. We're not hiding, Jesse said. We're right here, building something you couldn't destroy even when you tried. Horace yanked his horse around. Let's go. If my fool daughter wants to ruin her life, that's her choice. The 3 riders left at a gallop, dust rising in their wake. Clara stood trembling in the aftermath, adrenaline making her knees weak. Jesse's hand found hers and squeezed gently. You all right? I just told my father I was dead to him. He told you that. You just agreed with him. Clara laughed, a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. That's not better, Jesse. Maybe not, but it's honest. He turned to face her fully, his hand still holding hers. And you're free now. Really free. He can't touch you anymore. He can make our lives hell. You heard him, he'll make sure you can't work anywhere. Then I won't work anywhere. We'll make this homestead work. Jesse stopped, seemed to reconsider. Clara, do you want to go with him? Is that what you want? What? No. I just stood there and... I know what you said. I'm asking what you want. Because if you want to leave, if you want to go back to that life, I won't stop you. Clara stared at him. Even now, after she'd defended their marriage to her father, after she'd chosen him over the man who'd raised her, Jesse was still giving her a choice. I want to stay, she said. Here, with you, building something that's ours. Something in Jesse's face changed. The tension that had been holding him rigid since Horace arrived finally released. Then that's what we'll do. He squeezed her hand once more, then let go. I need to ride into town. Talk to Sheriff Dade. Make sure your father understands there are consequences if he tries anything. You think he will try something? I think desperate men do desperate things, and your father's been desperate since before we met. Jesse headed for the barn. I'll be back before dark. Lock the door while I'm gone. Jesse. He paused, looked back. Be careful. His smile was small but real. Always am. Clara watched him ride away, then went back inside the cabin. Her hands were still shaking. She'd just severed the last tie to her old life, burned the bridge so completely there was no going back. It should have felt like falling. Instead, it felt like learning to fly. She picked up Pride and Prejudice and tried to read, but the words wouldn't settle. So she paced the cabin, checking the door every few minutes, watching the sun track across the sky, and wondering if Horace was the type of man who'd come back with more men and worse intentions. Jesse returned just as the sun touched the horizon. He dismounted, and Clara was out the door before he could even tie off the horse. What did the sheriff say? That your father made some noise about reclaiming stolen property, but when Dade pointed out that I have a marriage certificate and bill of sale both legal, Horace backed down. Jesse unsaddled the horse. He's not happy, but he's not stupid enough to do something that'll land him in jail. So we're safe. For now. Your father's got bigger problems than us anyway. Word around town is he's mortgaged everything he has left. One bad season and he's finished. Clara felt a complicated twist in her chest. Part satisfaction, part sorrow. I should feel bad for him. But you don't. No, I don't. That doesn't make you cruel, Clara. It makes you honest about what he put you through. They went inside together. Clara heated up the stew she'd made earlier while Jesse washed the trail dust off. They ate in comfortable silence, both processing the day's events. Finally, Clara spoke. What you said to my father, about me being your wife, did you mean it? Jesse looked up from his bowl. Which part? The part where you said you wouldn't give me back, that I stay here. Yes, I meant it. Why? Because you're... Jesse set his spoon down. You're the bravest person I've ever met. You got dealt a terrible hand and you didn't quit. You learned everything I threw at you. You nurse wounded fools back to health and stand up to men twice your size who want to hurt you. He met her eyes. That's worth fighting for. You're worth fighting for. Clara's breath caught. No one had ever talked about her like that, like she was something valuable, not because of her name or her father's property, but because of who she actually was. I don't feel brave, she said quietly. Brave people never do. They just keep moving forward anyway. That night when they went to bed, Clara didn't stay on her side of the mattress. She moved to the center close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Clara, Jesse's voice was careful. I'm tired of the distance, she said. I'm tired of pretending we're strangers sharing space. We're more than that now. What are we? Clara turned her head to look at him in the darkness. I don't know yet, but I want to find out. Jesse was quiet for a long moment. Then his hand found hers between them and laced their fingers together. Yeah, he said softly. Me too. They fell asleep like that. Hands joined the space between them finally closed. Outside, Wind Valley settled into night. The corn in their field grew slowly toward sky. The cabin held warmth against the cold. And two people who'd been thrown together by desperation were starting to build something that looked almost like choice, almost like love. But that was a word neither of them was brave enough to say out loud yet. So they held hands in the darkness and let their actions speak louder than any declaration could. Tomorrow there would be more work, more challenges, more evidence that survival in this valley demanded everything you had and promised nothing in return. But tonight, Clara Holt fell asleep, feeling like she'd finally found something worth fighting for. And the man beside her, the servant who'd bought her freedom, dreamed of futures that might actually be possible if they just kept holding on. Summer hit Wind Valley like a hammer on an anvil, turning everything gold and merciless under a sun that never seemed to set. The corn grew tall enough that Clara could walk between the rows and disappear into green, rustling privacy. The garden yielded beans and squash and tomatoes that tasted like victory because they'd coaxed them from dirt that didn't want to give anything. Clara's hands were leather now, her skin browned from sun, her body lean from work that never stopped. When she caught her reflection in the water bucket, she barely recognized herself. The merchant's daughter was completely gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who could split wood and slaughter chickens and plant a field without flinching. Jesse watched her changing with something in his eyes Clara couldn't quite name. Pride, maybe. Or recognition that they'd both survived the transformation this valley demanded. They'd stopped sleeping on opposite sides of the bed weeks ago. Now they curled together in the darkness, sharing warmth and comfort, and occasionally whispered conversations about nothing important. Jesse's arm would drape across her waist. Clara's head would rest on his shoulder. It was intimate without being sexual tender, without demanding more than either of them was ready to give. But the tension was building. Clara felt it every time their hands brushed during the day, every time Jesse looked at her like she was the only real thing in a world of shadows. Every time she caught herself staring at the way his muscles moved when he worked without his shirt in the brutal heat. One evening in late June, they were sitting on the porch. Jesse had built rough planks that gave them a place to watch the sunset without standing. Clara was shelling beans. Jesse was carving a new handle for the axe, and the silence between them felt full rather than empty. "I've been thinking," Jesse said suddenly. Dangerous habit. He smiled at that. "I've been thinking we should have a real celebration, for making it this far. We celebrate by not dying, that's enough." "Clara." Jesse set down his carving. "When's the last time you did something just because it made you happy? Not because it was necessary or practical, but just because—" She couldn't remember. Before her mother died, probably. Before everything collapsed into survival and debt and desperate measures. "There's a dance in town Saturday night," Jesse continued. "Nothing fancy, just neighbors and music and a chance to remember we're more than workhorses. You want to take me dancing? I want to take my wife out, show her off, let people see what I get to come home to every night." Clara's heart did something complicated. "Jesse Holt, are you courting me?" "We're already married, seems like I missed the courting part." He met her eyes. "Thought maybe I could make up for it. Better late than never." She should say no. They couldn't afford the time away from work, couldn't afford new clothes for a dance, couldn't afford to pretend they were anything other than people hanging on by their fingernails. "Yes," Clara said. Jesse's face transformed the careful guardedness he usually wore, dropping away to reveal something younger, more hopeful. "Yeah. Yes, I want to go dancing with you." Saturday came with clouds building on the horizon that promised rain, but hadn't delivered yet. Clara wore the dress Jesse had bought her in town, simple calico in blue, that matched her eyes, the first new thing she'd owned since the wedding. Jesse wore a clean shirt and actually combed his hair, and when Clara saw him standing by the wagon, something in her chest went tight. He was handsome. She'd known that in an abstract way, but seeing him cleaned up and smiling at her like she was something precious made it hit different. "You look beautiful," he said. "You look like you're trying." "I am trying. Trying very hard not to say something stupid that ruins this before it starts." Clara laughed and let him help her into the wagon. They rode toward town with the sun dropping toward the hills and the air finally cooling from furnace heat to something bearable. "Jesse, thank you for this." For what? We haven't even danced yet. I might step on your feet. For remembering I'm more than a work partner. For remembering I'm... She struggled for the word. Human, Jessie supplied. Clara, I never forgot that. Not for a second. The dance was being held in the church, the same hollow building where they'd gotten married months ago. But tonight, it was full of life. Lanterns hung from the rafters, a fiddle player was tuning up in the corner, and people Clara barely knew were laughing and drinking punch, and acting like the valley wasn't slowly killing all of them. Jessie took her hand and led her inside. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Clara felt the weight of judgment from people who knew exactly who she was. Horace Wynn's daughter, who'd married down so far, she'd hit bedrock. Ignore them, Jessie murmured. Hard to ignore when they're staring like we're a curiosity show. Then give them something worth staring at. The fiddle player struck up a reel, and Jessie pulled Clara onto the floor before she could protest. He wasn't lying about potentially stepping on her feet. He was rough around the edges, clearly self-taught, but he moved with confidence and held her like she mattered, and that was worth more than perfect technique. They spun through the dance, and Clara felt something crack open inside her chest. Joy. Actual joy. She was laughing breathless alive, in ways that had nothing to do with survival, and everything to do with being young and dancing with a man who looked at her like she hung the moon. When the song ended, they were both breathing hard. Jessie's eyes were bright, his hair falling across his forehead, and Clara wanted to kiss him so badly her hands shook with it. Another, he asked. Another. They danced 4 more songs before taking a break. Jessie got them punch while Clara fanned herself with her hand and tried to remember how to breathe normally. Clara Wynn, or should I say Clara Holt now? She turned. Margaret Hollis stood there, a woman Clara's age who'd married a shopkeeper's son and made sure everyone knew she'd married well. Margaret, good to see you. Is it? Margaret's smile was sharp. I heard about your situation. Must be difficult living the way you do now. It's different, not difficult. Oh, come now. We used to take tea together, remember? You can be honest with me. Margaret leaned closer, voice dropping to false sympathy. If you need help getting away from him, there are people who would assist. A woman shouldn't be trapped in a marriage she didn't choose. Something cold slid down Clara's spine. I chose this marriage. Every day I stay, I'm choosing it. Because you have to. Because he bought you, and you have no other options. Margaret touched Clara's arm. It's not your fault. Your father put you in an impossible situation, but you don't have to pretend you're happy about it. Clara stepped back, shaking off the touch. I'm not pretending. I'm happier now than I ever was in my father's house. With a servant, Clara, be realistic. I am being realistic. Jessie treats me with more respect in a day than my father showed me in 23 years. He's teaching me to build something that matters, and he doesn't look at me like I'm property to be managed or a burden to be tolerated. Clara's voice rose slightly. So yes, Margaret, I'm happy. Sorry if that disappoints you. Jessie appeared at her elbow, 2 cups of punch in hand. He took one look at Clara's face and Margaret's shocked expression, and seemed to understand immediately. Mrs. Hollis, he said coolly, enjoying the dance. Yes. Lovely evening. Margaret recovered her composure. I should find my husband. Excuse me. She fled. Clara took the punch Jessie offered and drank half of it in one go. What did she say? That I should let people help me escape my terrible marriage to a servant who bought me like livestock. Jessie's jaw tightened. And you said, that I chose you. That I'm happier with you than I ever was before. Clara set down her cup. Was that all right? I didn't mean to speak for you, but... Jessie caught her hand, brought it to his lips, and kissed her knuckles right there in front of everyone. That was more than all right, he said quietly. That was everything. The fiddle started up again slower this time. A waltz. Jesse pulled Clara back onto the floor and held her closer than was probably proper, and Clara didn't care. She rested her head against his shoulder and let him guide her through the dance while people whispered around them. Let them whisper. Let them judge. She'd made her choice, and she'd make it again. When they finally left, the rain that had been threatening all day was starting to fall, fat drops that hit the dust and raised the smell of earth and promise. They rode home through the beginning of the storm, and Clara kept her hand on Jesse's arm the whole way. Inside the cabin, they were both soaked and laughing. Jesse built up the fire while Clara changed into dry clothes. The rain hammered on the roof, turning the world outside into water and darkness. "Best night I've had in years," Jesse said, standing by the fire. "We just danced and got rained on. We just spent an evening being more than what this valley tries to make us. That's worth celebrating." Clara moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Jesse, earlier when you kissed my hand, I shouldn't have, not without asking. Clara turned and kissed him. It was clumsy at first, unpracticed, both of them figuring out angles and pressure and where hands should go. But then Jesse's arms came around her waist, and Clara's fingers tangled in his hair, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home after a long journey. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jesse rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for months," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" "Because I'm the man who bought you, and I didn't want you to think you owed me anything. I wanted you to choose me because you wanted to, not because you felt obligated. I'm choosing you now. Is that enough?" Jesse cupped her face in his hands, thumbs stroking her cheeks. "Clara, you could choose me for 5 seconds, and it would be enough. Anything you're willing to give, I'll take gratefully." She kissed him again, and this time there was no hesitation. They moved toward the bed, still kissing hands, learning the geography of each other's bodies, through clothes that suddenly felt like barriers. "Are you sure?" Jesse asked, even as his hands trembled against her waist. "We don't have to." "I'm sure. I want this. I want you." They made love, slowly, carefully learning each other in the firelight while rain pounded the roof. It wasn't perfect. There was awkwardness and uncertainty, and moments where they had to pause and figure things out. But it was honest. It was real. And when Clara fell asleep afterward in Jesse's arms, she felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Peace. The storm broke sometime before dawn, and Clara woke to pale light filtering through the window and Jesse's steady heartbeat under her ear. She lay there feeling the rise and fall of his breathing, and tried to remember when she'd stopped seeing him as her jailer and started seeing him as her partner. Maybe it had been that first night when he'd slept outside to give her space. Maybe it had been the storm when she'd nursed him back from fever. Maybe it had been yesterday at the dance when he'd kissed her hand in front of everyone. Or maybe it had been all of those moments added together, 1,000 small choices that built into something neither of them had planned, but both of them needed. "You're thinking loud," Jesse mumbled, not opening his eyes. "How can you tell?" "I can feel it. Your whole body gets tense when you're working through something." He pulled her closer. "What's on your mind?" "How we got here, to this." "Regrets?" "No, the opposite of regrets. I'm just trying to figure out when I stopped being angry and started being—" She paused. "Being what?" Clara propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. Jesse's eyes were open now, watching her with an expression so tender it made her throat tight. "Happy," she said. "I'm happy, Jesse. Actually, genuinely happy. I didn't think that was possible anymore." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You deserve to be happy. You've always deserved it." "So do you." "Then I guess we're both getting what we deserve." Finally. They stayed in bed longer than they should have, talking and touching and learning the language of intimacy that went beyond just bodies. When they finally got up, the sun was already climbing, and there was work to do, but Clara didn't resent it the way she used to. Work was how they built their life, and their life was worth building now. 2 weeks later, Jesse came home from town with news that made Clara's stomach drop. "Your father's selling the ranch," he said without preamble. "Everything. The house, the livestock, the land. Auction set for next month." Clara sat down heavily at the table. "He's really that desperate?" "Worse than desperate. Word is, he's got debts to people in Denver who don't take kindly to being put off. If he doesn't sell, they'll take it anyway." Jesse hung his hat on the peg. "There's more." "What?" "The land we're on, the parcel we've been homesteading, it's part of the ranch holdings. It'll be sold too unless we can buy it first." The floor seemed to tilt. "We don't have that kind of money." "We have some. I've been saving my wages. And we could sell the corn crop early, won't get full price, but it'd give us something." Jesse sat across from her. "Sheriff Dade says if we can show proof of homesteading and come up with half the assessed value, he'll make sure we get first right of purchase." "How much is half the assessed value?" $300. Clara's heart sank. "Jesse, we don't have $300. We don't have half that." "Not yet, but we've got a month, and I've got a plan." "What plan?" Jesse leaned forward. "There's a man in Cheyenne who's looking for someone to break horses, paying top dollar $20 per horse. If I can break 15 horses in 3 weeks, we'd have most of what we need." "That's insane. You could get killed breaking that many horses in that short a time." "I could, or I could save our land." Jesse caught her hands across the table. "Clara, this is it. This is our one chance to own something outright. No more working someone else's land, no more answering to men who look at us like we're dirt. If we can buy this parcel, we're free. Really free." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him it was too risky, that losing him wasn't worth any amount of land, that they'd find another way. But she'd lived long enough in Wind Valley to know the truth, there wasn't another way. This was the chance that came once, and if you didn't grab it, you spent the rest of your life wondering what might have been. "When do you leave?" she asked quietly. "Day after tomorrow. I'll be gone 3 weeks, maybe 4 if it takes longer to break all the horses." Jesse squeezed her hands. "Can you manage here alone? I know it's asking a lot." "I can manage. I've learned from the best." "Clara, go to Cheyenne, break the horses, make the money." She met his eyes. "But you come back to me, Jesse Holt. You come back safe. Always." They spent the next 2 days preparing. Clara helped Jesse pack supplies for the journey. They harvested what they could from the garden early. Jesse showed Clara how to handle the shotgun he kept for emergencies, making her practice until she could load and fire without fumbling. "You probably won't need it," he said, "but I'll sleep better knowing you can protect yourself." The morning he left, Clara stood by the wagon trying not to cry. Jesse pulled her into his arms and held her like he was memorizing the feel of her. 3 weeks, he said into her hair. "I'll be back in 3 weeks. With $300. With $300. And then we'll own this land free and clear, and no man will ever be able to take it from us." Clara kissed him hard, trying to pour everything she felt into it, all the fear and hope and love she was still too scared to name out loud. "I love you," Jesse said suddenly. "I know I haven't said it before, and maybe I should have, but I'm saying it now. I love you, Clara. I think I've loved you since the day you stood up to your father and told him you were staying." Tears burned Clara's eyes. "I love you too. So much it scares me." "Then be scared. But trust me to come back." He kissed her one more time, then climbed into the wagon. "Take care of our home. Take care of yourself." She watched him ride away until he was just a speck on the horizon, then nothing at all. The valley felt enormous and empty without him. Clara stood there until the sun was fully up, then turned back to the cabin. 3 weeks. She could survive 3 weeks alone. She'd survived worse. The first few days weren't terrible. Clara kept busy with work tending the garden, feeding the animals, maintaining the cabin. She read by lamplight in the evenings and tried not to think about how big the bed felt with only her in it. But by the end of the first week, loneliness was starting to gnaw at her. She talked to the chickens just to hear a voice, even if it was her own. She jumped at every sound outside. At night, she lay awake listening to the cabin settle and wondering if Jesse was safe, if the horses were being kind to him, if $20 per horse was worth risking his life. The second week, a neighbor woman, Mrs. Chen, whose husband worked a patch of land 2 miles south, stopped by with bread and gossip. "Heard your man went to Cheyenne," she said, eyeing Clara with open curiosity. "Leaving you alone out here seems risky." "I can handle myself." "Sure you can. But if you need anything company help, whatever, you come find me. No woman should be alone this far from town." After Mrs. Chen left, Clara felt simultaneously grateful and annoyed. Grateful that someone cared enough to check on her. Annoyed that people still saw her as fragile. She wasn't fragile. Not anymore. The second week dragged into the third. Clara counted days like a prisoner marking time. She worked herself to exhaustion, so she'd sleep without dreaming of all the ways Jesse could get hurt breaking wild horses in a strange city. Then, 3 weeks and 2 days after he'd left, Clara was bringing water from the creek when she saw the wagon cresting the ridge. Her heart stopped, started, kicked into something that felt like it might break her ribs. Jesse was home. She dropped the water buckets and ran. Jesse jumped down from the wagon and caught her, spinning her around, both of them laughing and crying and holding on like they'd been separated for years instead of weeks. "You're home," Clara gasped. "You're really home. Told you I would be." Jesse set her down but didn't let go. "God, I missed you. Every day I was gone, I missed you." "Did you—" Clara couldn't bring herself to finish the question. Jesse's grin was wide enough to split his face. "Broke 16 horses. Made $320. We're buying our land, Clara. We're buying our freedom." She kissed him there in the yard, not caring that they were both dusty and exhausted and probably being watched by curious neighbors. Jesse was home. They had the money. The future they'd been fighting for was finally actually possible. That night, after they'd counted the money 3 times just to be sure, after they'd made love with the desperation of people who'd been apart too long, after they'd talked for hours about everything that had happened while Jesse was gone, Clara lay in his arms and felt something settle inside her. This was home. Not the cabin, not the land, but this lying beside the man who'd risked everything to give them both a chance at something better. "Jesse," she whispered into the darkness. "Yeah. When we go to the auction next week, when we buy this land, it's going in both our names, right? Not just yours." Jesse pulled back to look at her. "Clara, I never even considered it being any other way. This is our land. Both of ours. Equal partners." "Equal partners," she repeated, testing the words. They fit better than any title she'd been born with. "Equal partners," Jesse confirmed, "in everything." They fell asleep holding each other, while outside their window, Wind Valley settled into the quiet darkness. The corn they'd planted together stood tall in the field. The cabin they'd built together held them safe. And tomorrow, they'd wake up and keep building the life they'd chosen, hard and honest, and entirely their own. The merchant's daughter, who'd been sold like livestock, was gone. The servant who'd been told he was worthless was gone. In their place were 2 people who'd learned that worth wasn't something given by fathers or society or circumstance. It was something you built with your own hands, one day at a time, beside someone who saw you clearly and loved you anyway. And that was worth more than all the gold in Cheyenne. The auction was set for Saturday morning at 10 o'clock sharp, and by 9:30 the yard in front of what used to be Horace Wynn's ranch house was packed with people who'd come to pick over the bones of a dead empire. Clara stood beside Jesse at the edge of the crowd, the $320 heavy in Jesse's coat pocket. She'd insisted on coming, even though Jesse had offered to handle it alone. This was her past being dismantled, her father's legacy being sold off piece by piece. She needed to witness it. "You all right?" Jesse asked quietly. I don't know yet. Ask me after. The auctioneer was a fat man from Denver, with a voice that carried like a bullhorn. He stood on the porch where Clara had once taken tea with her mother and called out lot numbers like he was selling chickens at a county fair instead of a family's entire life. Lot, 1740 head of cattle, mixed breeds, good stock. The bidding was fast and brutal. Neighbors who'd pretended to be friends of Horace Wynn picked over his holdings with the cold efficiency of vultures. Clara watched men she'd known her whole life buy up her father's horses for half what they were worth, saw women who'd once smiled at her mother bidding on furniture from rooms where Clara had grown up. Lot 23, the main house and surrounding 10 acres. A man Clara didn't recognize bid high and won it without competition. The house her grandfather built would belong to a stranger now. Clara felt something twist in her chest, but it wasn't grief exactly. It was more like watching a door close on a room she'd already left. Jesse's hand found hers and squeezed gently. The auctioneer consulted his notes. Lot 24 northeast parcel 40 acres rough terrain, currently occupied by squatters with homesteading claim. Starting bid is $600. 600? Clara hissed. You said 300. That was half the assessed value. The full price is 600. Jesse's face had gone pale. I didn't think they must have reassessed after I left for Cheyenne. Clara's heart hammered. They were $300 short. $300 away from everything they'd worked for. $600, the auctioneer called. Do I hear 600? The crowd murmured. Everyone knew that parcel was barely worth half that rocky soil, no water access, nothing but a tiny cabin and dreams of making something from nothing. 500, Jesse called out. The auctioneer frowned. Starting bid is 600, sir. I've got a homesteading claim on that land. That gives me right of first refusal at a fair price. 500 is more than fair for land you can't even plow without breaking your back. The assessed value is 600. Take it or leave it. Clara's mind raced. They didn't have 600. Even if they sold everything they owned, the mule, the chickens, the tools, they'd still be short. $600, a voice called from the back of the crowd. I'll pay 600. Clara turned. Her father stood there, thin as winter and mean as snake, his eyes fixed on Jesse with pure hatred. Mr. Wynn, the auctioneer said, surprised. I didn't expect. $600, cash. Horace pulled out a roll of bills. For that northeast parcel. Clara's blood went cold. Her father was bidding on their land. The land he'd forced them onto in the first place. He was going to buy it just to evict them, just to punish her for choosing Jesse over him. 600 going once, the auctioneer said. 650, Jesse said desperately. You don't have 650, Horace called back. You barely have 300. I know exactly how much you made in Cheyenne Holt. I've got friends there too. 700. Horace continued, his smile cruel. Let's make this interesting. Jesse's hand tightened on Clara's until it hurt. They'd lost. They were going to lose everything because Horace Wynn would rather destroy his daughter's chance at happiness than let her win. 700 going once, the auctioneer called. Clara's mind was spinning. There had to be something some way. I'll pay it. Everyone turned. Sheriff Dade stood at the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable. Sheriff, the auctioneer said uncertainly. I'll pay the 600 for the Holts. Dade walked forward through the crowd. Consider it a loan. They can pay me back when they sell their corn crop this fall. You can't do that, Horace snarled. This is a legitimate auction. And I'm legitimately bidding. $600 for Lot 24 with the stipulation that the Holts retain ownership and residency. Dade pulled out his own money. Unless you want to go higher. Win. Horace's face turned purple with rage. This is corruption. You're the sheriff, you can't play favorites. I'm not playing favorites. I'm ensuring that a homesteading claim filed in good faith is honored. Dade's voice was steel. You want to outbid me? Put up your money. Otherwise, shut your mouth. The crowd had gone dead silent. Everyone could feel the tension crackling between Dade and Horace like electricity before a storm. Horace looked at Clara, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been pain if he'd been capable of such human emotion. You chose this. You chose him over your own blood. Don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. I won't, Clara said clearly. Because it won't fall apart. We're stronger than you ever gave us credit for. Horace spat on the ground and walked away. The crowd parted for him like he was contaminated. 600 going once. The auctioneer called, eager to move past the drama. Going twice. Sold to Sheriff Dade on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Holt. Clara's knees went weak. Jesse caught her, held her up. We did it, he breathed. Clara, we actually did it. After the paperwork was signed and Sheriff Dade had extracted a promise that they'd pay him back with interest, Clara and Jesse walked back to their wagon in a daze. Why did he do that? Clara asked. Why did Dade help us? Because he's seen what happens when men like your father win. Maybe he's tired of watching it. Jesse helped her into the wagon. Or maybe he just believes in giving people a fair chance. They rode home in silence, both processing what had just happened. They owned their land now. Legally, officially owned it. No one could take it from them. When they reached the cabin, Clara climbed down and just stood there looking at the rough structure that had become more home than any mansion she'd ever lived in. It's ours, she said wonderingly. Really ours. Really ours. Jesse came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. We did it, Clara. Against everything, we did it. She turned in his arms and kissed him hard, trying to pour all her relief and joy and love into it. When they broke apart, she was crying and laughing at the same time. I want to build something here, she said. Not just survive, but actually build. A bigger cabin, maybe a barn room for... She stopped. Room for what? Clara took a breath. She'd been waiting for the right moment to tell him, but there would never be a perfect time. Room for a family. I'm pregnant, Jesse. Jesse went completely still. You're what? Pregnant. About 2 months along, I think. I wasn't sure at first, but now... She watched his face anxiously. Say something. Jesse let out a whoop and picked her up, spinning her around while Clara shrieked with laughter. When he set her down, his eyes were bright with tears. We're going to have a baby. We're going to have a baby. Clara, his voice broke. I'm going to be a father. We're going to be parents. The weight of it hit them both at the same time. The responsibility, the terror, the absolute wonder of creating a new life in this harsh valley that demanded everything and promised nothing. Are you scared? Clara asked, terrified. You... More scared than I've ever been. She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. But also more hopeful. This baby is going to grow up on land we own in a home we built. That's more than either of us had. Jesse knelt in the dirt and pressed his forehead against her stomach. I promise I'll be a good father. I promise I'll give this child everything I never had. Love, respect, a name they can be proud of. Clara ran her fingers through his hair. You're already giving them all of that. Just by being who you are. They spent the evening making plans. They'd need to expand the cabin before winter. Add a room for the baby, make space for the life they were growing. Jesse would take on extra work to save money for supplies. Clara would sew baby clothes from scraps, prepare for the future that was coming, whether they were ready or not. That night, lying in bed with Jesse's hand resting protectively on her stomach, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. 6 months ago, she'd been a terrified girl being sold by her father to a man she didn't know. Now she was a woman who owned land, who'd fought for her freedom, who was about to become a mother. Jesse, she whispered into the darkness. Yeah. Do you think we're ready for this? A baby changes everything. We weren't ready for any of this. Not the marriage, not the homesteading, not fighting your father for our lives. Jessie pulled her closer. But we did it anyway. We'll do this too. Together. Always together. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Jessie and 2 neighbors started work on the cabin expansion. Clara sewed and planned and tried not to think too hard about all the ways childbirth could go wrong in a place with no doctor closer than 30 miles. Mrs. Chen visited regularly now, bringing advice and supplies and the kind of practical knowledge that came from raising 4 children of her own. "You're young and strong," she told Clara one afternoon while teaching her to knit baby blankets. "The first one's always scary, but women have been doing this since the beginning of time. You'll be fine." What if I'm not? What if something goes wrong? Then we deal with it. But worrying about what might happen won't change anything. Focus on what you can control. Mrs. Chen's hands never stopped moving the needles, clicking rhythmically. Have you thought of names? Clara hadn't. The baby was still abstract, still more idea than reality. Not yet. It feels like tempting fate. That's superstition talking. This baby's coming whether you name it or not. Might as well be prepared. That night, Clara brought it up to Jessie. Mrs. Chen asked about names today. Jessie looked up from the chair he was building, a rocking chair carefully crafted during the few evening hours he had free. Any ideas? If it's a girl, I was thinking Grace, for the grace life gave us when we found each other. Grace Holt. Jessie tested the name. I like it. What about a boy? I don't know. Something strong. Something that means he doesn't have to apologize for who he is. Jessie set down his tools. My middle name is Matthew. My mother's father was named Matthew back before... He stopped. Before what? Before my mother ran off with a ranch hand who didn't want to claim the baby that came from it. Jessie's voice was matter-of-fact, but Clara heard the old hurt underneath. I told you once that I'm the unclaimed son of a ranch owner. That ranch was your father's. Horace Wynn is my half-brother. The world tilted sideways. Clara sat down hard on the half-finished chair. What? My father. Our father had an affair with a Lakota woman who worked in his kitchen. When she got pregnant, he paid her to leave. She died when I was 7. I came back here looking for work, and Horace gave me a job in the stables because I looked enough like him that he couldn't deny the connection. But he never acknowledged it, never called me brother. Just let me work his land like any other hired hand. Clara's mind was reeling. Jessie, why didn't you tell me this before? Because it doesn't matter. Blood doesn't make family. Choice does. Jessie knelt in front of her. I didn't marry you to get revenge on my half-brother. I married you because your father was going to sell you to someone worse, and I thought maybe I could give you a choice. That's all. But you could have claimed part of the ranch. You're his heir as much as I am. I don't want anything from him. Never have. Jessie took her hands. I want what we built. This land, this cabin, this life. That's worth more than any inheritance. Clara pulled him into her arms and held on tight. You're a better man than he ever was. Than both of them ever were. I'm just a man trying to be worthy of you. You've been worthy from the beginning. I was just too blind to see it. They held each other in the lamplight, while the half-built rocking chair stood between them, like a promise. This child would have parents who chose each other, who fought for each other, who would teach them that worth came from character rather than bloodline. September brought cooler air and the corn harvest. Jessie hired 3 men from town to help cut and shock the corn, and they worked dawn to dusk getting the crop in before the weather turned. Clara helped where she could, though Jessie insisted she rest more now that her pregnancy was showing. I'm not fragile, she protested. No, but you're carrying our child. Let me worry about the heavy work. I've been doing heavy work for 6 months. And you'll do it again after the baby comes. Right now, you rest. Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion was catching up with her. Growing a human being took energy she didn't always have. So she let Jessie fuss, let Mrs. Chen bring her tea and sympathy, let herself be cared for in ways she'd never allowed before. The corn crop sold well, better than they'd hoped. After paying back Sheriff Dade with interest, they had enough left over to buy supplies for winter and lumber for finishing the cabin expansion. "We're going to make it," Jessie said one evening, counting their remaining money for the third time. "Actually make it. This time next year, we'll have a baby, a solid cabin, and crops in the ground. We'll be real homesteaders." "We're already real homesteaders. We've been real since the day we planted that first seed." Jessie smiled and pulled her close. "Yeah, I guess we have been." In October, Clara woke one morning to find Jessie standing by the window staring out at something she couldn't see. "What's wrong?" "Your father's dead." Clara's breath caught. "What?" "Mrs. Chen's husband just rode by with news. Horace died last night. Heart gave out apparently." Jessie turned to look at her. "They're asking if you want to attend the funeral." Clara sat up slowly, processing the information. Her father was dead. The man who'd raised her, sold her, tried to destroy her life one final time at the auction, gone. She waited for grief to hit, but it didn't come. "I don't want to go," she said finally. "That man stopped being my father the day he sold me. I don't owe him tears." "You sure?" "I'm sure. Let someone else bury him. I'm done being his daughter." Jessie nodded and came back to bed. "Then we'll stay here. Build our future, instead of mourning his past." But that afternoon, Sheriff Dade rode out to the cabin with an envelope. "This was in Horace Wynn's papers," he said, handing it to Clara. "It's addressed to you." Clara took the envelope with shaking hands. Her father's handwriting across the front. "To Clara, if I die before making this right." Inside was a single sheet of paper and a deed. The letter was brief. "Clara, I was a fool and a coward. I sold you to save my pride, and I've regretted it every day since. Watching you at that auction standing beside Holt, like you'd found something I could never give you, it broke something in me. Or maybe it fixed something that was broken all along. The northeast parcel was always meant to be yours. Your mother made me promise before she died that you'd inherit something of your own. I was too proud to honor that promise while I was alive. But you have it now. The deed's in your name alone, not Holt's yours. Your mother would have wanted you to have freedom. I'm sorry it took me this long to give it to you. Maybe you'll find it in yourself to forgive me someday. I don't deserve it. But your mother loved me despite my failings. Maybe you can remember that there was good in me once, even if I spent my life trying to destroy it. Your father." Clara read it twice, then handed it to Jessie without speaking. Tears were streaming down her face, but she wasn't sure if they were grief or anger or relief that it was finally over. Jessie read the letter, then looked at the deed. "Clara, this land is in your name. Just yours. He gave you full ownership. We'll change it. Put both our names on it like we planned. You sure? This is your inheritance. Your mother's wish." "I'm sure. We built this together. It belongs to both of us." Clara wiped her eyes. "Besides, my mother would have liked you. She believed in choosing people who made you better. That's what you've done for me." Jessie pulled her into his arms, and they stood there holding each other while Sheriff Dade cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'll leave you two alone. If you need anything." "Thank you, Sheriff," Clara said, "for everything you've done for us." After Dade left, Clara and Jessie sat on their porch, the porch that was finally legally, undeniably theirs, and watched the sun set over land that belonged to them by every measure that mattered. "Do you forgive him?" Jessie asked quietly. "Your father?" Clara thought about it. "I don't know if I forgive him, but I understand him better now. He was a man who couldn't see past his own pride until it was too late. That's its own kind of tragedy. You're more generous than he deserved." "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of carrying anger," It's too heavy. She took Jesse's hand. I'd rather carry Hope instead. That night, Grace kicked for the first time a flutter so faint Clara almost missed it. But then, it came again stronger, and Clara pressed Jesse's hand to her stomach so he could feel their daughter announcing herself to the world. She's strong, Jesse said wonderingly. She's ours, Clara corrected. And she's going to grow up knowing she's loved, knowing she's wanted, knowing her parents chose each other and chose her. Yeah, Jesse agreed. She is. They sat there in the darkness, hands joined over the life growing between them, and felt something settle that had been restless for too long. Peace. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of purpose. Clara thought about the girl she'd been 6 months ago, scared, angry, convinced her life was over. That girl would never have believed this was possible. Would never have imagined finding love in a forced marriage, finding strength in hardship, finding home in the middle of nowhere with a man everyone said was beneath her. But that girl was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who'd fought for her freedom, who was about to become a mother in a home she'd built with her own hands beside the man who'd seen her clearly from the very beginning. Horace Wynne was dead. The merchant's daughter was dead. The servant with no name was dead. In their place were Jesse and Clara Holt, husband and wife partners, parents-to-be standing on land they owned, free and clear, looking toward a future they'd earned. And that was worth more than any inheritance, any bloodline, any measure of worth the world tried to assign them. They'd built their own worth from scratch, and they'd keep building it one day at a time, for as long as life gave them. Winter came early that year, blowing down from the mountains with a vengeance that reminded everyone in Wind Valley that survival was never guaranteed. The first snow fell in early November, covering the harvested fields in white that looked peaceful, until you remembered it meant months of cold and isolation ahead. Clara was 7 months pregnant now, moving slow and careful through the cabin that Jesse had finished expanding just in time. The new room held the crib Jesse had built from oak he'd traded work for the rocking chair he'd finally completed, and blankets Clara had sewn from every scrap of fabric she could find. It was ready. They were as ready as they'd ever be. You should sit down, Jesse said for the 100th time that week. Rest. I've been sitting all morning. I need to move or I'll go crazy. Clara paced the cabin, one hand pressed against her lower back. This baby's getting heavier every day. I swear she's going to come out full grown. 2 more months. Just 2 more months. 2 months feels like forever when you're carrying another person inside you. But Clara smiled despite the discomfort. How's the woodpile? High enough to last through 3 winters. I'm not taking chances. Jesse was checking the windows, making sure the seals would hold against the wind. Mrs. Chen says she'll come stay when your time gets close. Help with the delivery. Clara's stomach tightened with anxiety that had nothing to do with the baby kicking. Childbirth terrified her in ways she hadn't admitted out loud. Women died in childbirth all the time out here, and there was no doctor within a day's ride. Hey. Jesse caught the fear on her face and crossed to her immediately. You're going to be fine. You're the strongest person I know. Strong doesn't stop things from going wrong. No. But you've survived everything else this valley threw at you. You'll survive this too. He rested his hand on her swollen belly. And I'll be right here. Every second. The baby kicked against his palm, and Jesse's face lit up the way it always did when Grace made her presence known. Clara let herself lean into his solid warmth and tried to believe everything would be all right. December brought storms that buried the valley under snow deeper than Clara had ever seen. They were snowed in for days at a time, just the two of them in the cabin, with nothing but firelight and conversation and the quiet intimacy of people who'd learned how to exist together in small spaces. Jesse read to her from the books he'd bought, Pride and Prejudice again, the Wordsworth poems, sometimes just the almanac, when they'd exhausted everything else. Clara taught him to play card games she'd learned as a child. They talked about their baby, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about dreams that felt safer to voice when the rest of the world was locked out by snow and ice. I want her to be brave, Clara said one evening, her hands moving over a tiny dress she was hemming. braver than I was. I want her to stand up for herself from the beginning, not wait until she's desperate. She'll be brave. She's got you for a mother." Jessie was whittling a wooden horse, a toy for a child who wasn't born yet but already owned their hearts. "I want her to know she's loved, no matter what. That her worth isn't tied to what she can do or who she marries or how well she meets someone else's expectations. She'll know. We'll make sure she knows." They were quiet for a while, the only sounds the fire crackling and the wind howling outside. Then Clara felt it a tightening across her belly that made her breath catch. "Clara? I'm fine. Just..." Another tightening, harder this time. "Oh." Jessie was on his feet immediately. "Is it time? Is the baby coming?" "I don't know. Maybe. It's too early." Panic rose in Clara's throat. "Jessie, it's too early. She's not supposed to come for another month." "Babies come when they come. That's what Mrs. Chen said." Jessie was already moving, banking the fire higher, gathering the supplies they'd set aside. "I need to get to the Chens, get help." "You can't. The snow's too deep. You'll freeze before you make it half a mile." Another contraction hit stronger than the first two. Clara gripped the edge of the table and tried to breathe through it, the way Mrs. Chen had taught her. Jessie's face was pale, but determined. "Then I'll deliver the baby myself. We can do this, Clara. Together." "You don't know how." "I've delivered foals. It can't be that different." "I'm not a horse, Jessie." "I know that." He took her hands, his grip steady, even though she could see fear in his eyes. "But you're strong, and I'm not leaving you, and this baby's coming, whether we're ready or not. So we're going to do this." The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. Clara had never known pain like this, relentless waves that crashed over her until she thought she'd drown in them. Jessie stayed with her every second, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, talking her through contractions that seemed endless. "I can't do this," Clara gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. "Jessie, I can't." "Yes, you can. You can do anything." His voice was rock steady, even though his hands shook. "You've done harder things than this. Remember that first day planting corn? You wanted to quit after an hour, but you kept going. That's what you do, Clara. You keep going." "That was different." "It's not different. It's all the same, you being stronger than you think you are." The sun was setting again when Clara finally felt the overwhelming need to push. Jessie positioned himself to catch the baby, his face set with concentration that would have been funny if Clara had any capacity for humor left. "I can see the head," Jessie said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Clara, you're doing it. One more push. Just one more." Clara bore down with everything she had left, and suddenly there was a release of pressure, and then crying, thin and angry, and the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. "It's a girl," Jessie said, tears streaming down his face. "Clara, we have a daughter." He wrapped the baby in a clean cloth and brought her to Clara's arms. She was tiny, red-faced, perfect. Clara stared at her daughter through exhausted tears and felt her heart break open in ways she hadn't known were possible. "Grace," she whispered. "Her name is Grace." Jessie knelt beside them, his hand gentle on the baby's head. "Grace Holt, welcome to the world, little one." They stayed like that for a long time, 3 of them now instead of 2. The cabin warm and safe, while outside the snow continued to fall. Clara had never been more exhausted or more happy in her entire life. "We did it," she said wonderingly. "We actually did it." "You did it. I just helped." Jessie kissed Clara's forehead, then Grace's. "You're amazing. Both of you are amazing." The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings and the overwhelming responsibility of keeping a tiny human alive. Grace was healthy, but demanding, crying at all hours, needing constant care. Clara was exhausted in ways that made fieldwork look easy. But she'd never been happier. Watching Jessie with their daughter, the way he held her with such careful tenderness, The way he talked to her like she understood every word. The way his whole face transformed when Grace wrapped her tiny hand around his finger. Clara fell in love with him all over again. "You're good at this," she told him one night while he was walking Grace around the cabin trying to get her to sleep. At what? Pacing in circles like a nervous horse. At being a father. At loving her without reservation. Clara smiled from the bed where she was finally resting. "She's lucky to have you. I'm lucky to have both of you." Jesse looked down at Grace, who'd finally fallen asleep against his shoulder. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That I get to have this, a family, a home, people who actually want me around." "Jesse." Clara sat up carefully. "You've always been wanted. I just took too long to realize it." He smiled and came to lay Grace in the cradle beside the bed. The baby stirred, but didn't wake her small face peaceful in sleep. "She looks like you," Jesse whispered. "She has your stubbornness. Cried for an hour straight earlier because I tried to change her diaper." "That's not stubbornness. That's knowing what she wants." They stood together watching their daughter sleep, and Clara thought about how much had changed in less than a year. She'd gone from being a piece of property to a partner to a mother. She'd learned to farm and fight and build something lasting from nothing. And the man standing beside her, the servant her father had forced her to marry, had become the love of her life in ways she never could have imagined. Spring came slowly that year, melting the snow inch by stubborn inch. Grace was 4 months old when the first neighbors started visiting again, curious to meet the baby that had been born in the middle of the worst winter in recent memory. Mrs. Chen arrived with food and practical advice. "She's beautiful, and you both look exhausted." "We are exhausted," Clara admitted, "but it's the good kind. There's a good kind of exhausted. When it's for her." Clara looked at Grace, who was sleeping in Jesse's arms, while he tried to eat lunch one-handed. "Yes, there's a good kind." Word spread through the valley about the homesteaders who'd fought Horace Wynne, bought their land against all odds, and were now raising a daughter on the northeast parcel everyone had said was worthless. People Clara hadn't spoken to in months started stopping by, some out of genuine interest, some out of curiosity, some looking for the scandal they assumed must be hiding. But there was no scandal. Just two people working hard, loving each other, raising their child. It was so normal it disappointed the gossips. Margaret Hollis came by in May, ostensibly to bring a gift for the baby, but really to satisfy her curiosity. Clara saw through it immediately, but invited her in anyway. "This is your cabin." Margaret looked around with barely concealed surprise. "It's cozy. It's home," Clara said simply. Margaret watched Jesse playing with Grace on a blanket on the floor, making faces that had the baby gurgling with delight. "You really are happy, aren't you? I thought maybe at the dance you were just putting on a brave face, but—" "I'm happy, Margaret. Genuinely, completely happy." Clara took pity on the other woman's obvious confusion. "I know it doesn't make sense to you. How could I be happy living like this when I could have had something easier? But easy isn't the same as good. And this—" She gestured at Jesse and Grace at the cabin they'd built, at the life they'd made. "This is good." Margaret left shortly after, still looking puzzled. Clara didn't care. She'd stopped needing other people to understand her choices. Summer brought planting season again, and this time, Clara worked with Grace strapped to her back, in a sling Mrs. Chen had shown her how to make. The baby watched everything with wide eyes, making happy noises, while her parents planted the future in soil they owned. "She's going to grow up thinking this is normal," Jesse said one afternoon, straightening from planting to ease his back. "Working the land, building things, all of it. It is normal. For us." Clara adjusted Grace's sunbonnet. "She'll know other things too. Books and music and poetry. But she'll also know how to survive, how to work, how to build something that matters." "Balance," Jesse said. "We'll teach her balance." They worked until sunset, painted the valley gold, then went inside to the cabin that felt more solid and real with every passing season. Grace was getting bigger, more alert, starting to show personality that was equal parts Clara's determination and Jessie's quiet strength. One evening in late summer, Clara was nursing Grace while Jessie made dinner. She watched him move around their kitchen, confident now in this space they'd created, and felt overwhelmed by gratitude. "Jessie." "Yeah. Thank you." He turned from the stove, confused. "For what?" "For not being the monster I thought you'd be. For seeing me when I was invisible to everyone else. For building this life with me even when I fought you every step of the way." Clara's throat tightened. "For loving me when I didn't think I deserved to be loved." Jessie set down his spoon and came to kneel in front of her. "Clara, you've always deserved to be loved. Your father was a fool who couldn't see what he had. But I saw you from the first moment, stubborn and scared and stronger than you knew. I've been half in love with you since before we even married. Half in love. Fully in love by the time you told me you weren't leaving with your father." Jessie smiled. "Completely hopelessly in love by the time Grace was born. Watching you fight through that labor, I've never been more in awe of another person in my life." Clara kissed him, careful not to disturb Grace, who was falling asleep at her breast. "I love you too, more than I have words for." "Then don't use words, just stay. Keep building this life with me." "Forever," Clara promised. "For however long we get." Fall came and went. They harvested another good corn crop, paid down more of their debt to Sheriff Dade, bought supplies for winter. Grace took her first steps in October, stumbling across the cabin floor into Jessie's waiting arms. They celebrated by reading her favorite story 3 times, even though she was too young to understand it. Winter was easier the second time. They knew what to expect, had more supplies, were better prepared. Grace was old enough now to be a real person, laughing at Jessie's silly faces, reaching for Clara when she wanted comfort, sleeping through most nights so her parents could actually rest. On a quiet evening in December, exactly 1 year after Grace had been born, Clara and Jessie sat by the fire while their daughter played with wooden blocks Jessie had carved. The cabin was warm, the shelves were full, and outside the window, snow fell gentle instead of threatening. "A year," Clara said softly. "A whole year." "Best year of my life," Jessie said immediately. "Even the parts where you didn't sleep for months. Especially those parts. Because they were with you and Grace." Clara leaned against his shoulder and watched their daughter stack blocks with intense concentration. "I was thinking about my mother today, wishing she could meet Grace. She would have loved her. She would have loved you. Who you became." Jessie's arm came around Clara's shoulders. "Your mother wanted you to have freedom. You have that now. You're free, Clara. Really, truly free. We both are." Clara laced her fingers with his. "We built that freedom together." Grace knocked over her tower of blocks and clapped with delight at the crash. Both parents laughed, and she looked at them with such joy that Clara felt her heart might burst. This was everything she'd never known to want. This was worth every hard day, every moment of doubt, every sacrifice. Years would pass. Grace would grow up strong and brave, knowing she was loved without condition. More children would come, 2 boys who looked like their father and had their mother's fire. The cabin would expand again, becoming a real house with proper rooms and glass windows. The land would yield crops that fed them through winters that got easier to survive. Neighbors would stop seeing them as the servant and the merchant's daughter who'd married down. They'd see the Holt family hard-working, respected proof that worth came from character rather than bloodline. Clara would teach her children to read using the books Jessie had bought her. Jessie would teach them to work the land with respect and patience. Together, they'd build something that lasted, not just the physical homestead, but a legacy of choosing love over convenience, dignity over pride, partnership over possession. Sheriff Dade would tell the story of their auction standoff for years, always ending with, "Sometimes the best revenge is building a life so good it makes your enemies look like fools." Margaret Hollis would eventually admit to Clara 10 years later, after her own marriage had soured, that she'd been wrong. That maybe marrying for love instead of convenience wasn't such a terrible gamble after all. And Horace Wynn's ranch house would eventually fall into disrepair and be torn down, while the cabin on the northeast parcel would grow into a thriving farm that fed not just one family, but dozens of neighbors who'd learned that the Holts were people you could count on. But that was all in the future. Tonight, on this December evening with snow falling soft outside and their daughter playing at their feet, Jesse and Clara Holt sat together in the warmth of the home they'd built and felt the kind of peace that only comes from surviving the worst life can throw at you and coming out stronger on the other side. "Jesse," Clara said quietly. "Yeah. If you could go back, if you could undo the marriage, start over, choose differently, would you?" Jesse didn't hesitate. "Not for a second. I'd choose you every time. In every life, every version of this story, I'd always choose you." Clara kissed him slow and deep, pouring a year's worth of love and gratitude and wonder into it. When they broke apart, Grace was trying to climb into Jesse's lap, demanding attention with the imperious insistence of a child who knew she was loved beyond measure. Jesse picked her up and settled her between them, and the three of them sat by the fire, while outside Wind Valley settled into another winter that would test them but wouldn't break them. Because they were the Holts, and the Holts didn't break. They bent, they adapted, they survived. And more than that, they thrived. They built lives worth living in a valley that tried to destroy dreams. They loved each other without reservation in a world that said people like them didn't deserve love. They proved that the greatest love stories weren't the ones written in ballrooms and parlors, but the ones forged in dirt and sweat and tears. The ones where two people looked at each other and said, "You. I choose you. Not because I have to, but because I want to. Not because it's easy, but because it's right." Clara looked at Jesse, holding their daughter at the cabin full of warmth and life at the future, stretching out before them full of possibility instead of fear. She thought about the girl who'd stood in a hollow church and whispered, "I do," like she was burying her freedom. That girl had been right to be scared. Marriage had killed the person she'd been, but it had given birth to someone better. Someone stronger. Someone who knew that love wasn't about ownership or obligation. It was about partnership and choice, and building something together that neither person could have built alone. "I love you," Clara said, and the words were a promise and a celebration and a declaration of independence all at once. "I love you too," Jesse replied. "Always have. Always will." Grace made a happy sound and reached for both of them, and they pulled together in a hug that held everything that mattered: past and present and future, struggle and triumph, fear and faith. The merchant's daughter was dead. The unclaimed servant was dead. In their place were Jesse and Clara Holt, parents and partner survivors and builders, proof that the best things in life come not from the circumstances you're born into, but from the choices you make when everything is on the line. They'd been forced into marriage by desperation and debt. They'd built love from nothing but stubborn hope and relentless work. And now they had everything that mattered: not wealth or status, or the approval of people who didn't matter, but each other and the life they'd chosen to build together. That was the real story. Not the forced marriage, or the cruel father, or the struggle to survive. The real story was two people choosing each other every single day in every single way that mattered, and building something so strong that nothing, not poverty, not prejudice, not even death, could tear it down. And that story would echo through generations, whispered to grandchildren and great-grandchildren as proof that love, real love, wasn't about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It was about showing up every day and doing the work and choosing your partner over and over again, until choosing them became as natural as breathing. The wind howled outside but couldn't touch them. The snow fell but couldn't bury them. The world tried to break them, but they held on to each other and refused to let go. Because they were the Holts. And in Wind Valley, everyone knew when a Holt made a promise, they kept it. When a Holt built something, it lasted. When a Holt loved someone, That love was forever. Jesse and Clara had promised each other a future, and they'd spent every day since that hollow wedding making good on that promise. Not because it was easy, not because anyone expected them to, but because they'd discovered something that no amount of money or status could buy. They were better together than they'd ever been apart. And that was worth more than all the gold in the world.